The starving stranger. The moon hung low in the night sky, casting a pale glow across the quiet forest. Far away from the nearest town, the trees stood still, their shadows stretching across the ground like ancient giants. In the distance, the faint sound of something scraping against the leaves disturbed the calm air. It was a sound so out of place, like the rustle of something foreign, something not meant to be here. The quiet was soon broken by the sound of labored breathing. A small figure, barely more than a shadow in the darkness, stumbled through the underbrush. Her movements were slow, unsteady, and there was a visible tremble in her small body as she dragged herself along. She looked like a child, but there was something strange about her. Her skin was pale, almost translucent, and her features were unlike anything seen before on Earth. The alien child had been wandering the woods for hours. She had no memory of how she ended up here, or why her ship had crashed so far from the nearest city. All she knew was that she was starving, and her strength was quickly fading. She had only one goal: to find food. Her stomach ached with hunger, a gnawing emptiness that seemed to drain her of everything she had left. Her large dark eyes scanned the forest, but there was nothing. No fruit, no animals, nothing. She had no idea what this place was, and the strange world she had landed in felt cold and unwelcoming. Her small hands reached up to her chest, where a small metallic object, her emergency beacon, glowed faintly. She tried to activate it, but her hands were too weak. The light flickered once, twice, then died completely. She had lost contact with her people. She was alone. Her legs wobbled, and for a moment, it felt like the ground beneath her feet was no longer stable. She fell to her knees, her body shaking as she fought to stay conscious. The world around her spun, her vision blurred. She was so close to giving up. But then, through the fog of her exhaustion, she saw something, a shape in the distance. At first it was just a vague figure, a silhouette against the dark backdrop of the trees. It was a house. She had to get there. With the last ounce of strength she could muster, she pushed herself to her feet and staggered forward. Her body screamed in protest, but she kept moving. Each step was a struggle. Her hands reached out to steady herself against the rough bark of the trees, her feet dragging through the underbrush. The house loomed larger with every step she took. It was old, made of wood and stone, and its windows were dark, offering no sign of life. Still, it was a place that promised safety, a place that promised shelter. As she approached, the cold air seemed to press harder against her skin, and the hunger inside her grew even more intense. She didn't know how much longer she could last. The house was the only hope she had left. Just as she reached the porch, her legs gave way, and she collapsed in front of the door. Her head hit the wooden steps, and the world went black. The sound of someone stirring inside the house echoed faintly through the air. The figure of an old man, hunched over and wrapped in a thick coat, appeared in the doorway. His eyes were tired, his face weathered with age, but his heart still had a spark of kindness in it. He had spent many years living alone, far from the bustle of the city. The quiet of the woods was his refuge. At first, he thought he saw an animal. But when he stepped closer, his eyes widened in shock. It wasn't an animal. It was a child. A small, frail creature, barely moving, lying unconscious on his doorstep. Her clothes were torn, her skin pale, and her chest barely rising with each shallow breath. The old man's heart raced as he knelt beside her. The strange markings on her skin were unlike anything he had seen before. He had heard of stories, of strange creatures from other worlds, but never thought he would encounter one in his lifetime. Despite the shock, the man's instincts kicked in. He couldn't leave her out here in the cold. Without hesitation, he scooped her up gently, carrying her inside his home. The warmth of the fire crackling in the hearth washed over the alien child as the old man laid her down on the couch. She barely stirred, still unconscious. The man quickly fetched a blanket, covering her small body, before starting a fire in the nearby stove to heat up water. As he worked, his mind raced. Who was she? Where had she come from? And why was she alone on Earth? The stories of alien encounters, if they were true, had always been distant myths to him. But this was real. He paused for a moment, watching her. Her chest rose and fell steadily, and he could see the faint glow of something embedded in her wrist, something metallic and foreign. He was no expert, but he knew enough to understand this wasn't something from Earth. The alien child's breathing grew steadier, and her face relaxed in the warmth of the fire. But the old man couldn't shake the feeling that her arrival on Earth was no coincidence. Something had brought her here, and he didn't know if it was for good or ill. As he watched her sleep, the old man made a quiet vow. He would protect her. No matter who or what came looking for her, he would keep her safe. The world outside might be filled with danger, but inside these walls, she was safe. For now. Little did he know, this was only the beginning. The strange child was about to change his life in ways he couldn't even imagine. A mysterious awakening. The house was silent save for the soft crackle of the fire burning in the hearth. The old man sat in a chair nearby, his weathered hands resting on his lap, eyes never straying far from the small alien child lying on his couch. He was trying to make sense of the events that had unfolded, but nothing about this felt normal. Everything he knew had been turned upside down in a matter of hours. The child had been unconscious for hours, but now, the faintest sound of stirring broke the quiet. The old man leaned forward, his heart pounding. Her small fingers twitched at first, followed by a slight flutter of her eyelids. For a moment, she seemed confused, as if waking from a long and deep slumber. Her eyes, dark as the night sky, slowly opened, and for a split second, the old man thought he saw something strange in her gaze, an intelligence beyond her years, a depth of experience that seemed alien even for an alien. She blinked, slowly focusing on the room around her. Her breathing was labored, but she seemed more aware now, her head turning as she took in the unfamiliar surroundings. She wasn't on the cold ground anymore. She was warm, safe. The alien child's gaze landed on the old man. Her eyes widened in confusion and fear. She instinctively tried to sit up, but her frail body didn't have the strength. The old man quickly stepped closer to her, his hands raised in a peaceful gesture. "Easy there, child," the old man said in a quiet, calming tone. "You're safe here. Rest. You've been through a lot." The alien child flinched at the sound of his voice, her large eyes darting to the door, as if expecting something to burst through at any moment. The old man could see the fear in her eyes, the way her small hands gripped the blanket beneath her, trembling with anxiety. "No need to be afraid," the old man continued, his voice gentle but firm. "You're not in danger here. I won't hurt you. I found you outside, collapsed on my porch. You were unconscious, starving." She didn't respond, but she kept her eyes on him. Slowly, cautiously, her body seemed to relax, though the tension in her shoulders didn't completely fade. The old man took a seat beside her, his gaze softening. He didn't know what to make of her, what she was, or how she ended up on Earth. But in that moment, he didn't need to know. He knew she needed help, and that was all that mattered. "I'll get you something to eat," the man said, standing up slowly. "You must be hungry. I'll be back in a minute." The child didn't say anything, but her eyes followed his movements. As he walked away, she glanced down at her wrist, where the small metallic device was embedded. Her fingers brushed over it lightly, as if trying to activate it, but it remained lifeless. She felt an overwhelming sense of helplessness. Her ship was gone. Her people were gone. She had no way to contact anyone. She had no idea what had happened or why she had been stranded on Earth. The hunger gnawing at her stomach felt like the least of her worries compared to the uncertainty of her situation. The old man returned with a simple bowl of soup, steaming gently. He placed it carefully on the small table beside her. The smell, faint but inviting, seemed to rouse the child. She looked at the bowl for a long moment, her hands trembling as she reached out. Her fingers hovered over the edge, unsure if she could trust this strange human offering. Seeing her hesitation, the old man gave a small nod. "It's safe. I won't harm you. Go ahead." Her hand trembled slightly as she grasped the bowl, bringing it close to her face. She didn't know how to eat the food, what it would do to her body, but the hunger was unbearable. With a quick breath, she took a small sip. The warmth of the liquid spread through her, filling the emptiness in her stomach. It wasn't much, but it was something. The taste wasn't familiar, but it was comforting, and for the first time in days, she didn't feel so alone. The old man watched her intently, his wrinkled face filled with concern, but also something else: curiosity. Who was she? Where had she come from? Why was she here? But before he could ask any questions, the alien child spoke, her voice soft and strained, but still unmistakable. "Why are you helping me?" The old man's eyes softened, and he leaned forward slightly, his voice steady. "Because no one should be left to suffer alone. Everyone deserves help when they need it." The child hesitated, her dark eyes studying him as if trying to gauge his sincerity. She wasn't used to kindness, to compassion, especially not from a stranger. She had learned long ago to trust no one, to keep her distance from others. Her mission, her people, they had all been her focus. But now, in this strange place, with nothing but this old man who had shown her kindness, she wondered if she had been wrong all along. Maybe there was something more to this earth than the cold, unfeeling place she had believed it to be. "Thank you," she whispered, barely above a breath, her voice trembling. The old man smiled, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "You're welcome. Rest now. We'll figure out what to do next." As she closed her eyes, her body finally relaxing into the warmth of the room, the old man sat quietly by her side. He couldn't help but wonder what the future held for them both. And though his mind was filled with questions, for now, there was only one thing he could do: protect this strange, starving child, no matter what came next. Little did either of them know, their meeting was the beginning of something far greater than either could have imagined. A bond forged in silence. The next few days passed slowly, filled with the quiet rhythm of daily life in the small house. The alien child, who had yet to reveal her name, had regained some of her strength, though she remained quiet and withdrawn. The old man kept his distance, allowing her the time and space she needed to heal, but he remained ever watchful, always ready to lend a hand when she needed it. Each day, he would prepare simple meals, offering them to her with the same gentle care he had shown on the first day. She always ate, though she never said much. There were moments, fleeting and rare, when she would look up at him with those dark, searching eyes, as if trying to understand the kindness he showed her. But there was something else in her gaze too, a kind of fear. It was not the fear of immediate danger, but the kind that lingered, deep and rooted. The fear of the unknown, of what had happened to her people, and most of all, of what might come next. The old man never pushed her to speak, knowing that trust wasn't something that could be forced. Instead, he would tell her stories of his own life. Tales of the world he had grown up in, of the people he had loved and lost, of the many battles he had faced in his younger years. In turn, the alien child would listen quietly, absorbing every word with an intensity that left the old man wondering just who she was and where she had come from. But despite her silence, he could sense that the connection between them was slowly deepening. One day, as the sunlight filtered through the small window, casting warm golden rays over the room, the old man sat beside her on the couch. She had been fiddling with the strange device on her wrist for hours, her frustration mounting as she attempted, unsuccessfully, to activate it. "Still no luck?" the old man asked gently. She glanced at him, her face tired and drained. "It doesn't work," she replied softly, her voice edged with bitterness. "I can't get it to send a signal. My people, my fleet, they won't know I'm here." The old man's heart tightened at her words. He could see the pain in her eyes, the weight of what she had lost, but he didn't know how to help her. He wasn't a scientist, he wasn't an engineer, and he certainly wasn't familiar with alien technology. All he could offer was his time and his patience. "Maybe it needs time," he suggested, his voice calm. "Machines like that can be temperamental. Sometimes they just need a little rest." She shook her head, her small hands still clasped around the device. "It's not just the machine. It's me. My people are gone. No one's coming for me." The words hung in the air, heavy and final. The old man wanted to say something, anything, to offer her hope, but he knew it wasn't that simple. The child had lost everything. A young alien, stranded on an unfamiliar world, with no way of contacting her people, no way of returning home. But then something inside him stirred, something that reminded him of his own youth, of the time when he had stood alone, facing impossible odds. He had lost everything once too, and though he had never been in her shoes, he understood the feeling of being completely and utterly alone. "I know it feels impossible," he said softly, his voice steady but filled with a quiet strength. "But you're not alone. Not anymore. You have me. And together, we'll figure this out." She didn't answer, but her eyes softened, the faintest hint of hope flickering in them. For the first time since she had arrived on Earth, she allowed herself to believe, even if only for a moment, that maybe she didn't have to face this alone after all. Over the next few days, the alien child spent more time with the old man, gradually opening up in small ways. She would ask him questions about Earth, about humans, about life in general. She learned how to cook, how to build small fires, and how to tend to the small vegetable garden outside. The bond between them grew slowly but surely, a bond that was forged in the quiet moments they shared together. The old man never expected to become so close to the child, but there was something about her, a quiet strength, a resilience, that stirred something deep within him. One evening, as the two of them sat on the porch, watching the stars overhead, the child looked up at the sky and spoke for the first time in a long while. "I used to watch the stars with my family," she said, her voice almost a whisper. "We would sit together at night, looking out at the vastness of space, wondering what else was out there." The old man turned to her, his gaze softening. "Do you think they're out there somewhere?" he asked gently. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she stared at the stars, her face filled with longing. "I don't know," she replied quietly. "But I hope so. I hope there's still someone out there who cares." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The quiet of the evening settled around them, and for the first time since the child's arrival, the old man felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, they could find a way to bring her home. But for now, all they could do was wait and hope. The old man's decision. Days passed in the small house, the routine continuing. The alien child, though still quiet and distant at times, was slowly becoming more comfortable in the old man's company. She had grown stronger, her eyes less haunted with each passing day. The food, the shelter, and the warmth of his home had begun to heal the physical wounds she had suffered, though her emotional scars remained. The old man, too, had begun to change. The once solitary life he had led seemed less lonely with the child around. She had brought a sense of purpose back into his world, a reason to wake up each day and take care of something other than himself. In return, he had offered her what little he had left to give: his compassion, his care, and his unwavering commitment to helping her find a way home. But deep down, there was a part of him that knew something had to change. As much as he had grown attached to her, the reality was that the child was not human. She had come from a far-off world, and no matter how much the two of them cared for each other, she would eventually need to return to her people. The old man had thought about it endlessly. What if he could help her contact her fleet? What if he could find a way to repair the broken communication device she had brought with her? What if he could help her finish the journey that had been interrupted so suddenly? But there were other thoughts, darker thoughts, that began to creep into his mind as well. What if her people had abandoned her? What if they had given up hope of finding her? Or worse, What if they were hostile? The last thing he wanted was to risk his life, or the child's, for a futile cause. Still, he couldn't simply sit back and do nothing. He had to try. One evening, as they sat together near the small fire he had built, the old man looked at the alien child and saw something in her eyes, a quiet desperation. She had been holding on to the hope of being reunited with her people for so long, but it was clear that the weight of the uncertainty was beginning to wear her down. The old man had seen that look before, in his own eyes, when he had lost everything: his family, his friends, his purpose. He knew how it felt to be uncertain about what the future held, to be uncertain whether anything would ever get better. "I've been thinking," he began, his voice steady but full of care. "Maybe it's time to try something different." The child turned toward him, her dark eyes locking onto his with an intensity that made his heart ache. "Different?" she asked softly. "I mean," he continued, "maybe we need to take the next step. You've been here for a while now, and you're stronger than when you first arrived. It's time to try and find a way to send a signal, to reach your people." She remained silent, looking down at the small device she had been tinkering with ever since her arrival. The flickering firelight cast long shadows on her face, giving her an almost ethereal look. "I know it's risky," the old man added gently, "but I can't sit here and do nothing. I have to try to help you." For a moment, the child didn't respond. Her gaze shifted back to the sky, her face filled with a mixture of hope and fear. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she spoke. "Do you really think it's possible?" The old man hesitated, his heart heavy with doubt. But there was something in her question that struck him deeply. She wasn't asking whether it was easy. She wasn't asking if he was sure. She was simply asking if there was a chance, a small chance, that something could be done. "Yes," he said finally, the word ringing out in the stillness of the night. "I do." The alien child turned to face him, and for the first time in days, she offered him a small, tentative smile. "Thank you," she whispered. The old man nodded, his resolve hardening. He didn't know how they would fix the device, or whether they would be able to contact her people, but he knew one thing for certain. He couldn't leave her to face this alone. He would help her, no matter the cost. The following days were filled with a sense of urgency. The old man searched through his tools, gathering whatever he thought might be useful. Meanwhile, the alien child continued to work on the device, her small hands moving quickly, her eyes focused with a determination the old man had come to admire. They both knew that they didn't have much time. Whatever had happened to the child's fleet, whatever had caused her to crash on Earth, was still a mystery. But every day that passed, the odds of finding her people grew slimmer. And yet, the old man couldn't help but feel that hope was still alive. As long as they were willing to try, as long as they didn't give up, there was still a chance. And so, together, they worked in silence. The fire crackled in the background, the only sound in the still night, as they prepared for the next step, whatever that might be. The signal of hope. Days turned into weeks, and the old man and the alien child grew closer as they worked tirelessly on the communication device. The small cabin, once quiet and lonely, now echoed with the sounds of collaboration and determination. The alien girl, who had once been silent and withdrawn, now spoke more often, asking questions, sharing stories of her home planet, stories of a world filled with strange landscapes and beings far more advanced than anything the old man could have ever imagined. Despite their differences, a bond was forming between them, one that neither of them could have expected. The old man found comfort in her presence, while the child had finally begun to trust him. Her eyes, once filled with fear and uncertainty, were now brighter, more hopeful. But despite this progress, there was still the nagging reality in the back of both their minds. The signal had to be sent. It was the only way to ensure that the child wouldn't be alone forever. The device was their only hope, a fragile, broken thing that had been damaged during her crash landing. With each passing day, the old man and the child carefully patched it up, using the few resources they had at their disposal. It wasn't easy, and the task seemed endless, but they were determined. And then, one fateful evening, it happened. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the landscape, the alien girl looked up from the device, her eyes wide with surprise. She had been fiddling with the small console for hours, trying different combinations of wires and circuits. The old man, who had been sitting nearby, didn't notice at first. He was lost in his own thoughts, wondering if their efforts had been in vain. But the sound of the device powering up broke him from his reverie. A soft hum filled the air, followed by a series of clicks and beeps that echoed through the room. The girl's face lit up with disbelief. "It's working," she exclaimed, her voice filled with a mix of excitement and caution. The old man stood up slowly, his heart pounding in his chest. He walked over to her, eyes wide with both wonder and fear. He had hoped for this moment, but now that it was finally here, he wasn't sure what to expect. "Are you sure?" he asked, his voice trembling slightly. The alien child nodded, her hands shaking with a mixture of excitement and nervousness. "Yes, I'm sure. It's alive. The signal, it's going through. They'll hear it." A lump formed in the old man's throat as he looked at the device. It was flickering, a faint but steady pulse of light emanating from its cracked surface. He could barely believe what he was seeing. After all the work they had put into this, after all the uncertainty, it was finally happening. They were reaching out to the stars, to the child's people. But there was still the question of whether anyone would answer. The alien child continued to monitor the device, her fingers dancing over the controls as she tuned it to the correct frequency. The old man watched her intently, his heart in his throat. His mind raced. Was this really happening? Were they truly about to make contact? The minutes seemed to stretch into hours, each second filled with an electric tension that neither of them could shake. Then, just as the old man was about to speak, the device let out a soft chime, a sound that sent a thrill through both of them. The alien girl's eyes widened. She leaned forward, her fingers trembling as she adjusted the settings. The signal had been received. There was no doubt about it. Someone was out there. But what would happen next? Would it be her people, or would it be someone, or something else? The old man felt a mixture of fear and excitement rising within him. He had no idea who, or what, was on the other end of that signal. The alien girl's people could be kind and willing to help, or they could be enemies. He had no way of knowing, and the uncertainty made the air thick with tension. As the moments dragged on, the device flickered again. A new series of beeps echoed from it, this time more complex and organized. The alien girl's face broke into a cautious smile, and she looked up at the old man, her eyes shining with the hope he had seen in her before. "They're responding," she whispered. "They're coming." The old man's heart skipped a beat. "Are you sure?" "Yes," the child replied. "It's them. I can feel it. They're coming for me." A mixture of relief and fear washed over the old man. The alien child had finally made contact with her people. They were coming to take her home. But what did that mean for him? Would she leave? Would he be alone again? His thoughts were interrupted by a soft hum from the device, and a deep, unfamiliar voice crackled through the speakers. "This is Commander Zarin of the Arcturus Fleet. We have received your signal. Prepare for extraction." The old man's breath caught in his throat. The voice was calm, authoritative, and unmistakably alien. But it wasn't hostile. There was no sign of aggression in the tone, only a sense of urgency. The alien girl stood up slowly, her eyes now glistening with unshed tears. "They're here," she whispered, her voice full of awe. "They're really here." For a moment, neither of them said anything. The world seemed to stand still, the weight of the moment pressing down on both of them. The old man watched her, his heart full of conflicting emotions. He had helped her, taken care of her, and given her hope. Now, the time had come for her to return to where she truly belonged. She turned to him, her gaze softening. "Thank you. You've saved me." The old man nodded, his voice barely above a whisper. "You've saved me too." And as the hum of the approaching fleet grew louder, the old man knew that, for better or worse, this was the end of their journey together. She had found her people, and he had found peace. The departure. The days that followed were a blur of preparation. The old man and the alien child worked side by side, collecting the few belongings that had become part of their shared life. The small cabin, once a place of solitude and silence, now felt heavy with the weight of their impending separation. There were no grand farewells, no dramatic goodbyes, only the quiet understanding that their time together had come to an end. The alien child was still overwhelmed by the news. The commander's voice had come through clearly, announcing the arrival of the Arcturus fleet. She had hoped, prayed, and even doubted that her people would find her. But now, standing on the threshold of this new reality, it felt surreal. She had spent so many years in isolation, learning to trust this kind, old man who had given her shelter and hope. Yet she knew that her destiny lay with her people, not with him. "Are you ready?" the old man asked, his voice gentle, yet firm. He had to ask. This wasn't something anyone could be ready for. He wasn't sure he was, but it was time. The alien girl, now standing by the makeshift communications device, turned to face him. Her eyes glistened, and for a moment, she said nothing. She wasn't sure if it was tears or the spark of hope in her heart that caused the shimmer in her gaze. There had been so many days where she had wondered if this moment would ever come. Yet here it was. "I think I am," she replied, her voice quiet, but resolute. "But it doesn't feel real. It doesn't feel like I'm really leaving." The old man smiled softly. He understood. Leaving the only person she had known, the one who had cared for her, would never be easy. But her people were coming for her, and she would have a life beyond the stars. It was all she could ever dream of. "Sometimes it's harder to leave the people we care about than to go home," he said. "But remember, your home is out there now. You're not alone anymore. And neither am I." Her gaze softened, and she nodded, stepping toward him. She hadn't realized how much she had come to depend on him, how much he had become her family. And while she was returning to a place far beyond her understanding, a part of her would always carry the memories of this place, and him. "I will never forget you," she whispered. "You've shown me more kindness than anyone else ever did." The old man placed a hand on her shoulder, the bond between them undeniable. "You're strong. You'll make them proud. And you'll always have a home here, if you need it." Just as they were about to say something more, a low rumble filled the air, followed by a hum that vibrated the very ground beneath their feet. The ship was arriving. It was as if the earth itself was reacting to the arrival of the fleet. The alien girl looked up, her heart racing. She had never felt such an intense pull. She had never been so close to returning home. The old man's gaze flickered over to the sky. In the distance, there was a faint light, just a dot at first, but growing larger by the second. The sound grew louder, and soon, the air was thick with the powerful hum of engines from a ship unlike anything he had ever seen. The alien child felt a shiver run down her spine. The ship was coming for her, but it was more than just a means of escape. It was a signal, an affirmation that her people had not forgotten her, that she was more than just a lost traveler. She was a part of something much larger. As the ship grew closer, the child stepped forward, her heart beating faster. "They're here," she whispered, almost to herself. The old man took a step back, giving her the space she needed. He could feel the weight of the moment pressing in on him. He wasn't sure how to feel. This child, this alien who had come to him broken and alone, was about to leave. She was going home. But a small part of him wished she could stay. He nodded silently, his expression serious but filled with quiet acceptance. The world had changed for both of them, and as the massive ship touched down gently on the land, he knew their paths had crossed for a reason. He had given her the one thing she needed most, a home, a family, and a glimpse of something beyond the stars. And she had done the same for him. The alien girl turned to him one last time, a final word hanging on her lips. "Thank you," she said. "You gave me everything." And with that, she turned toward the ship. The massive doors opened, and as the lights from the ship illuminated the clearing, she stepped inside. For a long moment, the old man stood still, watching as the ship's engines hummed to life. The child's silhouette grew smaller as she was carried away into the unknown, her destiny unfolding before her. The ship lifted off, rising into the sky, until it was nothing more than a speck against the vastness of space. As the hum of the engines faded, the old man let out a long breath. His life had been altered in ways he never could have imagined. He had found something he hadn't even realized he needed: a connection, a reason to believe in the possibility of something greater than the life he had known. But as the stars slowly began to reappear in the sky, he realized that it was time to move on. He had given all he could. He had been a part of something far greater than himself, and that was enough. And so he walked back to his cabin, his heart heavy but at peace. The world was still full of wonders. Maybe now, just maybe, he could start to see them again. As the night fell and the stars twinkled above, the old man smiled softly to himself. There would be no more loneliness. Not for him. Not anymore. New beginning. The old man sat alone in his cabin, the silence around him almost unbearable. The quiet was stark compared to the noise and bustle of the days leading up to the departure of the alien child. Yet in his heart, there was a strange peace. He had sent her off to a new world, one filled with possibilities far beyond what either of them had imagined. But in that peace, there was also a lingering emptiness. It was a feeling he couldn't shake, one that had followed him ever since he had first taken in the strange, starved girl who had arrived at his doorstep. As he sat there, his hands resting on the small table, a thought kept coming back to him. Was this really the end of their story? The alien child had gone on to fulfill her destiny, to reunite with her people. She had come to him broken, and he had helped her rebuild in his own small way. And in turn, she had brought him a gift, a sense of purpose he had lost many years ago. Outside, the winds had picked up, a storm brewing in the distance. The clouds churned ominously, the skies reflecting the uncertainty of the moment. But the old man's mind wasn't on the weather. He was thinking of the child, of her journey, and of the journey he might now have to undertake. The world had changed, and so had he. He could feel the transformation deep within his soul, but he also knew there was more to his own story. He wasn't sure where to begin, but he knew he wasn't ready to stop living. He had been a witness to something remarkable, a reunion of a lost soul with her family. Now it was his turn to move forward, to find a new purpose. The old man stood up from the table and walked to the small window that overlooked the horizon. There in the distance, the lights of the alien ship still lingered, fading as it disappeared into the blackness of space. And somewhere out there, among the stars, the girl was fulfilling her mission, her new life unfolding with every passing moment. A faint, almost imperceptible sound interrupted his thoughts. It was a humming noise, soft at first, but growing louder. The old man turned, squinting into the dim light of the cabin. At first, he thought it was just the wind playing tricks on his ears, but then he recognized it. The familiar hum of the communications device, the one that had brought the alien girl into his life in the first place. He crossed the room quickly and reached for the device. It had been silent for so long, ever since the girl had left. With trembling hands, he activated it, and the screen flickered to life. A holographic image appeared in front of him. It was a message. The old man's heart skipped a beat as he saw the face of the alien girl once more. But this time, it wasn't just her face that appeared. There were others behind her, members of her species, standing tall and proud, their eyes filled with determination. She was surrounded by them, not alone. And standing beside her, in the foreground of the image, was a figure he recognized immediately. The commander. To the one who helped our lost child, the commander's voice rang out in a deep, echoing tone. You have done more for her than you could possibly know. We are eternally grateful for the kindness you have shown. And as a token of our appreciation, we extend an offer to you. You may visit our homeworld, if you wish. You will always have a place among us. As a hero, the one who believed in a lost soul and helped her find her way. The message ended, and the hologram faded. The old man stood there, in stunned silence, unable to process what he had just heard. The offer was unexpected, too unexpected. But then a thought surfaced in his mind. What if this is the next step? What if, just as the alien girl had needed him, he now needed them? He wasn't sure what to make of it, but something deep inside him told him that this wasn't just a message of gratitude. It was an invitation, not just for him, but for his future, a future that had just begun. With a heavy breath, he glanced out the window once more. The storm had passed, and the stars had begun to shine through the darkness. The journey ahead would not be easy, but it would be a journey nonetheless. And perhaps, just perhaps, the old man was ready to take that first step into the unknown. As the night stretched on, he made a decision. The time had come for him to leave his small, quiet life behind and face what awaited him in the great expanse of space. He had given all he could to the alien girl, and now it was time to give something to himself. The universe was vast, and there were countless adventures waiting for him. And for the first time in a long while, he felt a spark of hope, knowing that there was more to life than he had ever imagined. The old man packed the few belongings he had left and stepped outside, looking up at the stars. The night sky was beautiful, full of possibilities, and now he was ready to explore them, ready to find what lay beyond the stars. The universe had changed him, and now it was time for him to change it too. With a determined smile, he set his sights on the horizon, and the journey ahead began.